So you begin this process of pushing towards the convention-like reform, and what I imagine happens is what happened 100 years ago, literally exactly 100 years ago, when the last time we came close to a convention, calling for the election of senators, because the Senate at the time was conceived to be the source of all corruption inside of government. We came within one vote, and Congress very quickly sent an amendment out to get the senators as elected because they didn't want to see the convention. So the convention is a peaceful form of terrorism here that would really shake up, and I think that should be on the table as much as reviving in the spring Occupy movements.
Well, everything should be on the table. On the other hand, I think I have a darker view of the systems of power. I think they're so calcified and so corrupt. And I think that there's pretty good evidence that a lot of these corporations are just harvesting the country. They know it's over. They're grabbing as much as fast as they can, including looting the U.S. Treasury on the way out the door. I think there's a really deep cynicism. Of course, nurtured at places like Harvard Business School. I think they get it. I mean, they probably wouldn't disagree with our analysis at all. And yet we have no mechanisms now to stop them. There is no way to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. Obama has proved utterly useless in terms of curbing these class of speculators who are using taxpayer dollars to reinflate the bubble all over again and make themselves as much money as they can before it crashes. I mean, it's really quite staggering.
No, the failure of reform is the biggest signal that this system is totally corrupt. I mean, it's one thing to imagine the buying of deregulation before 2008.
Right.
But what should terrify everybody, even conservatives, is the fact that after this crisis, for the first time in American history, the government didn't have the power to respond with real reform.
Just to bring it back to your proposal, in terms of, Chris was talking about Occupy creating parallel structures, other ways to interact with each other and to govern, groups of people. I mean, you're talking about working within, there's a provision in the Constitution that allows people to change the structure of it. Does that, and you say we could work on multiple fronts, but would that draw energy off from this other type of activity?
I don't know why it has to, because that type of activity wants to find ways to express its effectiveness, and this is one way to express its effectiveness. I think that the Occupy movement, I don't purport to speak or even understand, but the Occupy movement doesn't want to become the Tea Party in the sense they don't want to become quickly aligned with a whole bunch of inside Washington lobbyists on our side of the issue as opposed to the other side of the issue. But I think that there is a real value in demonstrating the way in which these alternative structures restructure society. And one way in which they do this is by beginning to exercise control over the government that the government itself doesn't control. I mean, that is a quite extraordinary thing. We've never done it, right? So what if we did it? What would that mean? The inspiration of the Occupy, there's an extraordinary thing happening in Vermont right now where Vermont is people are pushing for a convention resolution in Vermont coming from the Occupy movement. But none of the real leaders there are people who are, intense. They're people who are intense in the inspiration that this has caused. So I agree, it's about reframing power, but let's talk about all the places reframed power can have an effect. And maybe there's a 0.01% chance that it has an effect in this path, but it's worth it. It's worth it to try.
Of course it's worth it. Yeah.
It seems like you sort of have different approaches, but have come around to saying, well, all approaches are good.
Well, not all approaches are good. I would say all approaches that seek to delegitimize the centers of power are good and useful, and we need a multiplicity of approaches, as I think we're both in agreement upon. And sitting around wringing our hands about whether they're going to succeed or not before we try is a waste of time. We should just try. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else.
Right.
Would you agree that anything that sort of is destabilizing the sort of central concentration of power is useful? Would you accept that as a way of thinking about your project?
Yeah, well, my focus is on the particular concentration of power inside the Beltway of Washington that destroys all sorts of social possibility, and that's the thing I want to destabilize first. Of course, that does a lot for what happens down here in downtown New York too. So that's a consequence of destabilizing that power. But I have a sequence, and that's what I'm going to start at.